Let's get started and see how we can bring Ursula to life. Here on my table, I have a pattern all laid out, which I'm going to start with to modify this particular cosplay. I'm using the Sweetheart dress from Patterns for Pirates because it already has that perfect sweetheart neckline, and it's in a nice knit based pattern, so that'll make it very forgiving should my seam allowances not be exactly perfect. And the purple I found for the top for Ursula's flesh color is kind of a spandexy fabric, so that's why this is the pattern I've decided to start from. I already made one of these that fits me, so this is my one that's a little smaller that I can travel with and talk to people about. So I'm going to make her a medium so it fits most general sized basic sewing mannequins. I'm just going to roll out some pattern tissue here. This is just inexpensive stuff that I bought at my local craft store. It's kind of that see-through-y tissue. And I'm going to get this pattern traced off, and then we're going to talk about how I modified it to get the look that I'm going for. Alright, so I've charted down a couple other things that I needed. I've got my basic pattern tissue here. I've got a pair of paper scissors. Don't use your good scissors for this. While it's kind of fabric-y, wouldn't be my choice. And a tape measure. So let's talk about how I'm actually going to modify this skirt. So I've done a little bit of math ahead of time, and I've learned that I can't make the tentacles that are hanging down any longer than about 45 inches based on the fabric itself that I'm going to use. So my 45 will actually run diagonally across my skirt. So that kind of puts me here off the back side of my table. So I'm just going to generically go with about 45 inches worth of pattern tissue, so I have 20 to work with. I will need to track down my French curve to get some nice curved angles and such. Of course, if you don't have a French curve, not a big deal. I'm actually going to use a little mini one that I found that fits perfectly in my travel stash, and see what I can do to make this work. So let's get this laid out and start tracing off. This particular pattern, the sizes are actually color-coded. So in the case of this one, the medium that I'm looking for is actually the light, well, regular blue dashed line. So I'm going to kind of finesse my pattern tissue here. Now, cut edge to cut edge off the back of my table is what is my 45 inches that I can't go any larger than if I'm still going to fit it on my fabric. And I'm going to trace off the basic shape of the longest skirt that's available on this particular pattern. I'm also going to trace the length for the quote mini skirt, just so I have some idea of how long I need like the bell shape of Ursula to be, so that way I'm not accidentally exposing the mannequin. That way if we actually put this on a person, we don't have their rear end hanging out and causing scandal. So that's the mini, and oh, while we're at it, just for reference, let's go ahead and trace the peplum length on here too. Mind you, I'm not being super accurate with these because we're going to make this into a nice big flowy tendril for the bottom of Ursula, so we can actually play with it. Alright, I'm going to slide my other pattern piece out here so you can see kind of what I'm left with. Alright, so there is my pattern piece all nice and traced off. And now we're going to start to play with this and really have fun. When I started to edit this video, I noticed a few things were going to be challenging to show on the scale that I was doing. So the last of the video you just saw, we had just traced off the pattern piece. It was the big full-size piece. And I decided I'm going to work on a miniature scale so you can see what I'm doing a little better. So this is actually about 1/4 the size of what my finished one's going to be. I already did the math to know that I can't make this any longer than 11 inches to be able to have the same length like the other one would be with the 45 inches for the side of my fabric. So I'm just going to measure out from the center point that would be on my skirt down my 11 inches. It's actually 11.25 when I did the math. Make some rough marks and give us a wider range of a skirt that we could play with here, so we can figure out how to make all the fun curvy stuff and I'm not standing in your way blocking the camera, because, well, that kind of defeated the purpose. So this would be roughly the longest length skirt that we could make and have work. So we need to keep our tentacles coming down no longer than this point here in order for this to work correctly. Now, I got out my little mini French curve that I told you about. In the case of this particular demonstration, this isn't going to do you much help, but using it on the larger scale, this makes it way easier to draw those curves in there. So Ursula has 6 tentacles. So how do we get 6 tentacles from what is 1/4 of a full circle skirt? Well, some quick math, and obviously that means that if I divide this into 3 even parts across the skirt, that would be 12, so I would need to use 2 of those to get 1/6 of the skirt. So that's how we're going to work off of this. You will see that I just made a pattern, a copy of the pattern smaller so we could fiddle with it here. So I'm going to roughly fold this into thirds. As long as it's somewhat close, it won't be an issue for what we're going to do. So there's our rough folded into thirds. Turn it over. You can see here I'm pretty close. Again, like I said, I'm purposefully working with a knit pattern because I like ease and forgiveness in my seam allowances. So I'm going to give that a quick rough chop. When I open this back up flat now, you can see that would be the maximum size that I could have for my skirt. So we're only going to work with 2 of these parts. So I am just going to take where this other fold is, and I'm just going to cut it away so we're not even worrying about it. All right, there we go. So just for a quick refresher here on what we've got going. The one closest in would be our waist. We've got our peplum length, our mini skirt length, our full skirt length, and the absolute longest we could make that tentacle in order to still fit it on our fabric. In this case, we're in a 1/4 scale, so, you know, clearly this is way smaller than what we would be, but this would be a nice Barbie doll size, Ursula. So, peplum's not going to cover one's behind. Mini is just going to cover the behind. So, you're just going to take your French curve and you're going to kind of use it to draw your circle that comes around here. Sorry, I'm trying to work and not get the break of my table in the way here. And you know what? I'm going to use the shoulder part of this to start to curve around here so we can see what I'm doing. Of course, on your actual Ursula, you know, you'd probably make that work a little differently. You know, you might bring in your 2 sides and kind of take your first one and curve it back down around a little and bring it up and in. You can do this all freehand, just like I'm doing here. Or, of course, you can actually, you know, get out your curve and take a look at it. Now, when I look at how wide this is over here on the side, I really want that to be a little slimmer profile because I tried that really wide one once. And when I was looking at it and playing with it, I decided it was a little bit too wide. So there's kind of my rough, what I would do. I might take a little width out of here too. But remember, I want it to be as long as what the mini skirt was, so it provides plenty of coverage in the rear as well as coverage for our actual bell shape of Ursula. So this would be your rough pattern. You could go ahead now on your full size one. You could cut this out. If you don't like it, choose a different color marker or pen, draw it over again. That's the best part about making this yourself, is you get to really take control over what it looks like. And even as you go to cut the curve, I'm not exactly following the initial curve that I drew because I'm not really great at it. So, as I'm coming back in with my scissors, I'm really perfecting that curve to look the way that I want it to look. Now remember, I'm working on a much smaller scale than what you're going to be working on. I'm working on about a 1/4 scale of what my finished dress would actually be, which you'll see here in just a moment. I'll pull out the pattern piece that I actually made But like I said, when I went to edit this down, just wasn't what I wanted. So, all trimmed out. There is the pattern piece that we would actually be working with. Now, this particular Ursula that I'm working on, what did my pattern piece wind up and look like in the end? And here is my skirt as it kind of curls around there. And then from here you can start making some rough measurements to figure out just how much of that superstructure foam you're going to need to go in here, as well as the measurements on how much fabric this is going to take to make the skirt bottom. So just for quick reference on this one, we are at about 44 inches long, and at the widest point, about 26 inches. So those are a little wide, just so that way I have seam allowances in there, but that's where I would need to go to actually make this work. So this particular one at this size, after doing the math, it's going to take me roughly 3 yards of superstructure foam. So of course, sometimes statement pieces can't be as large as we want. So in this case, I started the same way. I made my quarter of my circle skirt, and because it was going to be way smaller, I went ahead and traced it out and did a whole half and folded that half down into thirds so I could figure out what size tentacle I wanted to make. And with these all lay flat here, you will see that I have 6 tentacles, one on top of another, to make an Ursula that would actually fit into 1 yard of superstructure foam and 1 yard of coordinating 45-inch fabric. So in this case, there we go, now you can actually see it again. So in this case, you know, I figured out that in order for it to fit on that 45-inch wide fabric, it couldn't be any longer than 22 inches in any one direction. So rough measurement on this one, we fall at about 18 the short way, and the long way we fall at 20. So by the time I open this up, and you can see all 6 of these tentacles, you'll see that they're going to take up quite a bit of space. Now this really makes a shorter, cuter mini version of Ursula, and by doing it as one pattern piece, notice you wind up with mirrors. So you've got a section here where they're really wide and a section here where they're really close together. It just depends on how you draft that, if you're going to get the really close together or the really wide part of your Ursula skirt. So now we're going to go ahead and take these patterns, we're going to transfer them to fabric, and we're going to start cutting out our Ursula.